Hello to all of those of you joining us early. This is just a 10-minute warning for you. We'll be going live with our webinar at 5 p.m. CET, so we'll speak to you soon. Hello, everyone, wherever you are watching from in the world, whether it's good morning or good afternoon, or maybe even good evening. Welcome to our webinar, which today is titled Self-Driving Car Technology, When Will the Robots Hit the Road? Now, I'm Chris Medland. Usually I work in Formula One as a journalist and broadcaster, writing and talking about that racing series. But I'm very excited to be your host today to talk about autonomous cars with Acronis SIT Autonomous and Roborace. And that's mainly because I learn loads whenever I host one of these, so they're great fun. Now, we're live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitch. So thanks for joining us wherever you are for this webinar. We have two speakers today. They are Ilya Shimchik, the Acronis SIT Autonomous Team Principal, and Bryn Balcom, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Roborace. Now, I mentioned the different platforms that you're tuning in from, but you can still send in any questions for a Q&A later after some great presentations we're about to have. So be sure to send them in using the platform that you're on, and then they should get to me so that I can put the questions to the two panelists for you. So let's get to our two panelists, as I know they have lots to tell you before we get to your questions. So first up is Ilya Shimchik, the Acronis SIT Autonomous Team Principal. Over to you, Ilya. And in good old-fashioned Zoom style, we've just got a bit of a technical issue. Ilya's going to get himself off mute, and then he'll be back on it.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Hello, Chris. Thank you for introduction. And today I'm going to talk about self-driving technology and the main question, when the robot autonomous car will hit the road. So the first question, why do we need autonomous cars? And the answer is quite easy, because we have a lot of deaths due to the car accident each year. It's more than 1,350,000 people die each year due to the road accident. And most of these crashes and deaths is due to the human error, because driver was distracted or didn't notice some road collision or road accident. That's why we have these accidents. And if we have autonomous cars, these numbers will be reduced drastically. Because autonomous car won't be distracted by mobile phone or by pedestrian or by any other car on the road. And also another big benefit of self-driving technology and self-driving car is, of course, we can reduce congestions, because in case if all cars is autonomous, we don't need actually traffic lights, because autonomous car can communicate with each other and pass intersection without any traffic lights, and it will increase the speed of communication transportation. And because of this, there is direct impact on environmental gains, because we will have less impact on the environment, because we spending less gasoline for driving autonomously, and autonomous routes and autonomous paths will be more efficient rather than human driven paths and routes. Also, humans stay productive during the driving, because he don't need to pay attention to the road. He don't need to pay attention to the environment, to the car. He can stay in the car and just focus on the thing, focus on their work and save time. Also, of course, it's saving money, because again, it's one direct impact, because autonomous car will less impacted by the car accidents. There is saving on this side, and also it provides us more independent, because car is available always. It's autonomous. We can share the car with different people. It's autonomous taxis, and it's easier to access and be transported from one area to another. And before we go to the prediction when we will have these autonomous cars deployed everywhere, let me speak about the levels of autonomy that usually we are talking in automotive industry. So level 0, there is no automation at all. There is no any driver assistance system or any subsystem which helps to drive, to steer, or to accelerate the car. Second, we have level 0. It's partial assistance to the driver, and there is like levels to which extent car interact with car can exchange with driver. So at level 0, there is no interaction with a human. At level 1, the car can either steer or either accelerate or decelerate the car. At level 2, it's a partial automation, and car can at the same time control the speed slightly or control the braking and steering at the same time. So for example, it's already deployed technology of cruise control or automatic braking or ABS technology or ESP technology. Next is level 3 automation. That's the case when the car can partially be autonomous in some areas. And by the way, in levels 1, 2, 3, and there is human-centered autonomy. So humans should be ready to return to the control of the car during some amount of time. So for example, in Tesla Autopilot, you should react to the car signals and be back to the take over and control the car again. So it's like 3 seconds or 10 seconds, you need to react and take control of the car. In level 4 and 5, it's a level of fully autonomy. And in these cases, actually, human don't need to be responsible, and he don't need to be control to control the car, because the car is fully responsible for the all level of control and driver behavior. And for example, good example of level 4 autonomy is the last mile delivery. So for example, there's some car which can be autonomous in some particular area, in some particular weather condition, and they are autonomous. So that's also autonomous car which can deliver the groceries, which can deliver the one person in some private area, from one city to another home, to the grocery store or back. And level 5 autonomy, that's when we're talking about full autonomy in any case, in any condition, in any environment. So there is no human at all should be involved into the driving behavior. And then talking about prediction. So actually there is very different prediction about this, about when we hit the road. There's some optimistic prediction, for example, by Elon Musk. He said that in 10 years, we'll definitely have each automakers should make the autonomous car, fully autonomous car, I mean, level 5 autonomous car. And again, prediction from Rodney Brooks, there is at 2031, there will be cities with some autonomous driven areas, only autonomous driven areas without any humans as the drivers in those areas. And then in 2045, there is major cities in the United States will be driven in autonomous mode, and there is no human involved in this activity. And that's too optimistic predictions. But other guys from automotive industry, for example, director of Nissan R&D or CEO of Toyota Research Institute, saying that there is no automotive industry or IT business who is ready to provide the true level 5 autonomy at near foreseen future. And also there's opinion that human will be involved in the driving always. There is no case when we will have a full level of 5 autonomy. Also, when we're saying about prediction, we need to mention at which extent we can say that it's already autonomous, because in many cities we already have some autonomous pilots or prototypes or demo projects who delivering the groceries or delivering people from one area to another area in autonomous mode. But it's more like a R&D project or prototype or demos. And usually, I mean, we can pick some number and say that if autonomous technology will be deployed with number of like 10,000 cars at some particular area, then we can say that we hit this goal of autonomous vehicles and we can drive this area autonomously. For example, in New York, there is about 40,000 taxi drivers in Uber. So if you replace this like a 25% by autonomous car, we can say that we achieve some level of autonomy. Let me move to the next slide. And there is a connection what we are doing as a racing team, as autonomous racing team. And let me explain why do we need competitions and how competition pushing forward us to the new level of technology and new level of innovation. Back in 2004 and 5, there was DARPA Grand Challenge, which actually this competition was held in the United States, and it was between major universities in the United States. And here on the photo, you can see the car from Stanford. It's called Stanley. They won this competition. And after this, many people were saying that we already hit this target of autonomy, and now it's only level of application. So research level is ready for the deploying, and we just need to use this technology that we applied in DARPA Grand Challenge and then just apply it and make and build autonomous car. But it's not like as you see, we are not still there, and autonomous car is not deployed yet in every city. And that's why we are continuing developing. And I think as Formula One pushing forward the technology for automotive technology, and we can notice some transfer of technology from Formula One to the to the real world, to the roads. Also, Formula E pushing forward the technology of electric vehicles. They are transferring the technology of electric batteries, electric motors from racing cars to the public road, to the real cars. And so Roborace doing the same, but they doing the same for the self-driving technology. They pushing the limits of self-driving technology, exploring this, how we can drive car autonomously at the high speeds, at the higher level of friction of the car between the car and the road. And it's also road relevant competition, which help us to develop and test our algorithms in safe environment. So in Roborace environment, we don't need to interact with real world, I mean, with public road. There is a safe track where we testing our algorithms, testing the performance of algorithms. And here's an area where we can say that we can drive the car autonomously as a professional racing driver. And for me, the main driver why we are doing this is that I believe that at some point we can say that we can drive car autonomously as a professional racing driver, and that's when that's the target when we can say that AI car safety system developed in Roborace we can apply to the real world. And imagine that in case of emergency, and if you have an accident in the car, or like you close to have accident in the car on the road, in this case many people act as a just usual average driver. But imagine if in this case, car will act autonomously as not like average driver, but it will act autonomously as a professional racing driver who tested its performance in the safe environment of racing, and then utilizes knowledge, utilizes software algorithms in public road. And I believe it can prevent many crashes and collisions in the public road. And that's actually one of our goals, as I mentioned. So we are participating in Roborace because it's very interesting competition for us, and we are one of our goals is not only to is of course is to compete and win this competition, but also we have another long-term goals is to advance self-driving technology and develop and test AI car safety system with a full awareness of surrounding, and deploy this solution to the real cars and transfer this technology. And what technology we are using here, and what technology are we developing in Roborace? So let me dive deep and explain a bit about levels of autonomy that we have in Roborace right now. So actually, the car, we can consider the car as a robot. So because it's autonomous robot, it has steering control input for controlling the steering wheels, acceleration, braking. It also has perception into the sensors. It's cameras, lidars, GPS sensor, V2X sensor, with which we can communicate with other cars and other road obstacles, or with the race control. And also we have algorithms which needs to process data from the sensors, from the perception subsystem, understand the environment, make the decision in very short time, and then control the actual car. So control the actuators, control the steering wheels, braking and acceleration. That's the main general task for us here. Also, there's some subtasks, because right now in Roborace we have pretty challenging task. We would like to achieve a wheel-to-wheel racing by the end of the season, and there's some gradual incremental steps. Each challenge we have different task for us as a team. And for example, the last event was held in Las Vegas, and the task for the teams was how to avoid collision with the obstacles, with dynamic obstacles moving on the track, and how to do it as fast as possible without moving out from the track. And that situation is very similar to what's happening on the real track. So we need to drive safe and fast and avoid collision with other obstacles. So that's why it's road relevant. It's road relevant technology for obstacle avoidance, and also for path planning and path following for autonomous cars. Also here in Roborace, we have, in past season, we had a task of mapping and localization. We need to do the map of the track and localize the car on the track based on the sensors that we have, and then control the car at the limits of handling. So that's the task that's actually present, and we can see only in Roborace environment, because when other automotive companies developing their algorithms, they're not actually looking pretty close to the limits of handling of the car, to the limits of the car. They need to control the car at standard environment, at standard condition, without pushing the car to its limit of cornering, to limits of acceleration, to extreme condition. And here in Roborace, we can safely test the car at limits of handling, at limits of acceleration, and understand the car dynamics, car physics, and how to control the car at such conditions. And that's how we are getting closer to the to the stage where we can control the car very carefully and safely at high speed, at high limits. Also, the expertise that we need to control the car and that we need to develop in Roborace environment is pretty similar to robotics, with some extension to the autonomous driving. So of course, we need to understand clearly the car dynamics and how to model the car, how to understand how to control the car and move the car along the track. Also, it's system control task, path following, path predictions, obstacle avoidance, and there is a computer vision task related to the sensor fusion task, because we have cameras, we have lidars, we have GPS sensors, we have acceleration sensors, IMU, etc. So there's a lot of data we are collecting each time, each second, and we need to process this data very carefully, precisely, and then make a decision based on this data. And that's why it's pretty challenging. So it's challenging not only in algorithm wise, but it's also challenging how to optimize all this processing into the computer unit that we have on the real on this car. And saying this, I think that's the last slide from my side. I'm very open to the questions that will be at the end of the session. Chris.
Thank you very much, Ilya. Personally, I find the future potential so interesting and love hearing about it, especially the levels of autonomy and how far we have to go. So it's just fascinating to me. Now, as Ilya mentioned as well, just a reminder to send in any questions and we'll put them to our panelists a bit later on. But I mentioned Ilya's role as team principal of the Acronis SIT Autonomous Roborace team. And now it's time to hear from Bryn Balcombe, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Roborace itself. So welcome, Bryn.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed, yeah.
Excellent, super, thank you. So I wanted to start with what is the future of motorsport. So a bit like Chris, I started my career in Formula One. Is there a future for Formula One? Absolutely. What is that future? Yeah, it's up for debate. At the moment, it's moving towards e-fuels in order for it to be more sustainable. The last stuff I heard was about active aero. So it's a technology-led sport. You know, how does that evolve? Will the humans taking part in the sport evolve? No, they'll be the same. Lewis Hamilton will get old, he'll retire, there'll be another driver that comes through. And the format is the same as well. If you look back, it's been the same for 70 years. You know, it races over the same distance, it races even at some of the same tracks. So there will be always a future for motorsport. Over the last 10 years, motorsport has really adopted electric technology. So whether that's hybridization of Formula One, of Le Mans cars, whether that's fully electric cars with Formula E, or the latest Extreme E series, which launched over the Easter weekend that we've just seen. Is there a future for electric racing? Yeah, 100%. But it still has a human that sits in there. So it's just a change of powertrain technology. So what is that future of motorsport, and what's that new technology that we're going to be adding in? And that's where I think it's artificial intelligence. And if you look across our lives, artificial intelligence will have a huge impact. So not just within motorsport, but if you're looking for really the core technology that's going to change motorsport in the next 10 years, it will be artificial intelligence. Arguably, it's already affecting motorsport already. It's just being done behind the scenes. So when you hear race strategy in Formula One and you hear advice being given to the driver, all of that is really generated through artificial intelligence, the analysis of all the data to establish what the pattern of the race is and what the best decisions should be. So it's just banned in motorsport for directly assisting or aiding the human driver. And that was about 25 years ago that those rules were brought in. So, but I like this quote from the CEO of Google. He's like, AI will be as profound as electricity or fire, in terms of its impact. And there's lots of speak about, the next 30 years, there's going to be more transformation than we've seen in the last 3,000. And that's really because the power of having artificial intelligence and what it can do for our productivity. So leading on from that, back in 2015, Google actually did the first fully driverless, self-driving car demonstration on the roads. That was about 7 years after the competition that Ilya mentioned, the DARPA World Challenge, Grand Challenge. So, and this is their car. So that no driver at all. Actually, the passenger is blind, so he can't actually see. This is the first time he's been in a car alone. You can see, the perception system there being able to detect the road, detect the other objects around, plan the path of the vehicle, using cameras, using the LiDAR on the top. And it's a huge moment. So have we got driverless cars on the road? Yes, there was one in 2015. Last year, Waymo launched a service in Phoenix, Arizona. And that's a service that you can book just like you book an Uber at the moment. Is it at the scale Ilya was mentioning, like 10,000 cars in one city? No, we're not there yet. But certainly the technology has improved a lot in the last 15 years. But we looked at that back in 2015, which is when Roborace launched, and we thought, looks a little bit boring. And obviously coming from a motorsport background, we decided to do something else instead. So that was the vision, that was the renders that we had. Did we bring it to life? Yeah, for sure we did. So this was 2018 Goodwood Festival of Speed. This is the Robocar that you just saw in all those beautiful renders, designed by Daniel Simon, a futurist Hollywood sci-fi designer, did the Tron Legacy light cycle, used to be a designer at Bugatti. So over the weekend, this was over 160,000 people over 4 consecutive days. You can see them lining the track, obviously pre-COVID times. And what you see here is the vehicle fully driving itself. There's no remote control. It's just the software in the vehicle. It's the first time anyone had ever done this at Goodwood Festival of Speed. It was incredibly nerve-wracking. I'm still a bit nervous watching it now, to be honest. You can see the car twitching, as it's driving up the hill. That's all to do with the perception system accuracy. Goodwood, you'll notice, has a lot of tree canopy cover. A lot of the good demonstrations that you can do have open, clear sky because you can use GPS and inertial systems. In Goodwood, that's not possible. So you have to build a map of the environment using your cameras, using your LiDAR. And then, as Ilya said, during the run, effectively you're referencing yourself against that map. So the vehicle has radar, LiDAR, machine vision cameras, GPS inertial system for the purposes of navigation, but all of that driving then was done using software. And the thing I'm most proud of is that when the car got to the top of the hill, the crowd clapped and cheered. So I'm not sure who they were clapping and cheering for. There was no driver in the car, but I think it was for us, the team, that had made it happen. So, but that was always nice. And then back in March 2019, with Robocar, we actually set the Guinness World Record for the fastest autonomous car in the world, and we still hold that record at the moment. Maximum speed was 176 miles an hour. Obviously, a considerable amount of testing went into that.
So we are
and this is a bit of the behind the scenes.
This is the official attempt. We're going to do VMAX at 280 kilometers an hour.
So there was actually very little damage to the car. They were obviously testing at an airfield with large runoff areas, but crashes are the things that actually help motorsport develop. You know, they're the things that make you realize if you've reached the edge of something, you've reached the limit of something. And now once you've reached the edge, then you look for a solution to try and solve that. So just by having that environment where you can really push those limits gives you that ability to advance the technology and advance the state of the art. And I think that's what motorsport has always done. So back in 2020, in order to get more people involved, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, actually, we launched Roborace Season Beta.
What does the future look like? I have an idea, but I can tell you exactly what it sounds like.
This is the official attempt.
Is it going to work?
We're about to find out.
We're not trying to outcool anyone.
We're trying to out-nerd everyone.
Metaverse is a mixed reality racing format where you can play with data and give the right to place objects to our audience. So it's not just another motorsport thing, it's motorsport 2.0.
This is either going to be a glimpse into the future
or a spectacular failure.
Either way, you're going to want to watch.
So in Season Beta, we've got 7 teams, a mixture of commercial teams, university teams, developing the software to compete in DevBot 2.0. So you've seen the Robocar. DevBot 2.0 is again fully electric, and I'll let the video do a bit more of explanation on that.
The DevBot 2.0. A bespoke racing platform developed specifically for Roborace. The DevBot 2.0 is all electric with 270 kilowatts of power. It can hit speeds of up to 230 kph in full autonomous mode. The DevBot 2.0 features 4 types of autonomous driving sensors: GPS, LiDAR, camera, and radar. These sensors allow the DevBot to drive accurately at unprecedented speeds. The DevBot 2.0 can be human or AI driven, allowing the exploration between man and machine for assisted and autonomous technologies. The future of racing has arrived.
So I'm already trying to catch up with myself. So when I was young, I never thought we'd be able to take humans out of racing cars, for sure. So we're already there. But to push the limits even further, what you'll find is a lot of motorsport teams use simulation. So simulation is obviously a virtual environment where you can go and develop the technology, run thousands, if not millions of miles without even hitting the racetrack. And one of the reasons Formula One cars are so reliable now is because of the amount of simulation work that they actually do. What we've done in the last year and what Season Beta has all been about is how do we take that simulation technology and bring that into the physical world to enhance what we can do with physical testing. And that's really what the metaverse is. So the metaverse enables us to bring the physical DevBots, but bring them together with virtual objects streamed live from a digital twin. So this is an extreme version of the vision of the competitions that Ilya has been taking part in. Obviously, that's a rather extreme view, and some of that is focused on entertainment. But the actual reality is that the objects that are appearing in that environment, you have to avoid, and you have to avoid them dynamically. And as Ilya was saying, that's key to being able to drive an autonomous car on the road safely. So the more complex we can make those objects, the more complex we can make those interactions, and the safer that we can do that, the better. What we'll be doing in season beta is enabling wheel-to-wheel competition, but first with a real car and a virtual car, before, as Ilya said, towards the end of the year, moving to physical cars, both on the track at the same time. So that's really, the metaverse is a development tool, but it's also a huge entertainment tool where we'll allow the public to engage with what those dynamic objects are and how they move and how they behave. So creating full two-way interaction between real and digital is what we're doing within the Roborace metaverse. So hopefully that's given you some brief idea of what we're up to. There's obviously a lot that we could talk about. So thank you again for the invitation to come talk to you here today. And I'll hand back over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Brent. It's fascinating stuff. And I always think that there's too much simulation in Formula One and not enough real world testing and cars on track. So I love that you kind of mix the two together with Roborace. I think it's brilliant. Okay, now it's time for our attendees to run the show a little bit with your questions. So send them in and I'll do my best to put as many of them to our two panelists as possible. I've got a few here that have been sent in already. The first one's for Ilya. It might be a quick one, but it's an exciting question actually, because it says, I'm currently working on a mobile robot project with facial recognition for my master's thesis, which will take place in July 2021, so this summer. I would like to do my PhD in your team because this project that you've presented effectively meets my expectations. So Ilya, if you have space for someone to come and join your team, I think someone's looking for a bit of an opportunity.
Yeah, of course, we have such opportunities, but actually this question not for our team, it's mostly for SIT as a university, as an institute, because there is open position for PhD opened in SIT. You can join SIT as a PhD student, and then you can work with our topics in our area, and we can supervise you how to proceed with this, for example, computer vision topic in Roborace with our racing team. So first you need to apply for SIT, and then we can collaborate.
There we go. Great advice. And I'm sure people will be in touch on that one. Now, the next question I think is good for both of you here. So maybe, Bryn, if you want to go first with this one. The question is, will we lose the randomness caused by humans driving the car? So isn't AI too predictable and reliable to keep the sport side of things interesting?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. It's about what happens when you take the human out. Does the human add randomness? Yes, I would say so, but so does the environment. And so I think there's an assumption a little bit, and I think this is predicated around chess. You know, when we had the sort of Deep Blue versus Garry Kasparov, once Deep Blue has beaten Garry Kasparov, it's never going to lose a game. It knows exactly how to play that game in order to win. Yeah, motorsport isn't like that. And you can see that Lewis Hamilton loses every year before he wins a championship, but he loses every year. And that's because the conditions change and the situation changes. And the reality is that if you're pushing the limits, and that's what you do in motorsport, that's what every motorsport driver should be doing, they should be at the absolute limit, you will find the limit. And that's what creates the randomness. Every driver out there in Formula One could drive below the limit and be fine. There wouldn't be any crashes, there wouldn't be any, let's say, overtaking maybe. But you still have overtaking actually, but you just wouldn't be as exciting maybe. But the minute you try and push the limits, you will find the limits, and that's what creates randomness. And we've seen that in Roborace already. So
I also can add something to this question because I think to some extent we already lost this randomness in Formula One, because you can find some videos in YouTube, for example, how Formula One drivers driving blindly in simulator and how they finish the lap blindly without any like a visual input. So they just driving with closed eyes. So this also, we are losing a randomness. But of course, in real world, in real environment, not in simulator, there is randomness from the environment, and we cannot predict this environment in advance. And also we cannot predict in advance the actions of our cars. I mean, of course, we can predict. AI driver can predict its own actions and can drive like the same line each lap. But if we have other cars on the track, they bring this randomness to the track.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between simulation and, as Ilya was saying, robotics. Really, robotics is AI in a physical world, and the moment you do that, you add a load of randomness and noise into that environment that didn't exist in the simulation before. And then I think, you're right, going back, Chris, in Formula One, that I think it was a couple of years ago that, accusing the teams of making the drivers into robots. All they have to do is carry out the strategy that's been determined by the team. And then they say to the driver, you need to target this lap time, you need to do this now. And so that they've become a robot to the AI that sits in the center that actually defines the strategy of the race. So the randomness has kind of been diminishing. We just don't see it because it's behind the scenes. So.
Yeah, I fully agree actually on that as well. Before we turn into an F1 bashing session, but no, I do agree, and I can see.
I wouldn't bash F1. I love F1. I watch it every weekend. So, but it's just interesting to see how the technology kind of creeps in and how you manage that. In Formula One, as I said, 25 years ago, introduced the sort of must drive alone and unaided rule. In order to ban things like active suspension or traction control and all of those things that kind of reduce driver skill. They wanted to sort of remove those technologies from doing that, and I think that was the right decision. But in some ways, it means that for 25 years, motorsport hasn't contributed to the future of safe mobility on the road, where we need ESP and ABS and all of these intelligent systems to try and enhance safety. So it's got to an inflection point now where we really need to see motorsport adopt those technologies and push the boundaries of those technologies.
Yeah, that actually brings us on to the next question quite nicely, actually, because it is kind of the joining of safety measures between the crossover. So it's coming on the Zoom chat, which is, what safety measures did you implement to avoid any potential conflict between the AI and the driver? Now, I know with the DevBot 2.0, I think there is space for a driver to go in there. So Ilya, when the driver's in there, how do you kind of make sure there's safety measures that means that something doesn't go wrong as the two try and conflict with each other?
So safety measures when the driver inside the car. So we cannot test at high speeds when the driver is in the car. Also, we can test only to specific acceleration limits and cornering acceleration. And it's actually, right now we are not testing this driver. Only like if we have major improvements in our software and we would like to go slowly just to check that everything working as we expected on the car. It's just very slow lap, like below 100 kilometers per hour and below like a half G of acceleration is quite slow. So we just like a initial test, and then the driver is moving out and we continue our testing without the driver and having higher limits of acceleration and higher limits in the speed. And also there is another like a safety subsystem implemented in the car. So it's kind of not like, it's in some sense it's sandboxing our software in the car. So if our software behaves not correctly, for example, not moving along the path that we would like to follow, this guards or like a wedge dogs detect this and they will stop car safely, like a safe stop. So that's another safety measures that we have in the cars.
Yeah, I can open that up to Bryn, actually. Yeah. Also, before you answer that, looking further as well, is it something that you'd like to see from Roborace to maybe get to the point of having a driver in there who's not driving, but to actually put a human in there to show how it will become a safe thing for on the actual road? Because I guess that's the thing with AI, isn't it? Is that we want to transport people in these cars.
Yeah, we have transported Guy Martin in the car before, and I'm not sure if you've ever met Guy. He's obviously famously got no fear at all. So he's probably been the fastest passenger ever in an autonomous car. He went up to about 180 kilometers an hour at Stowe Circuit in Silverstone. So he was competing against the AI. So the game was, he went out, set some lap times. He then stayed in the car while the engineers were tuning the parameters to try and get the car to beat his lap time. And he was giving them feedback and advice on how to handle different corners. That resulted in him spinning out, ending in the gravel, getting out of the car and then saying to the marshals, I wasn't driving, it wasn't me. So look, there's a lot that you can do, and the interaction between human and the technology is definitely an interesting thing. I think from what Ilya was saying with the DevBot, that having the ability to have a human in there just really helps with simple things like going out and doing mapping of the environment. So before we did the run at Goodwood, we had a human drive the DevBot up the hill. It then was able to build a map. So it doesn't need to be driving autonomously when it's doing that. It can just be in a data acquisition mode. It also means that if you shut the vehicle down at any point from a safety issue, you can recover the vehicle easily by jumping in it and driving it back. You don't need a recovery vehicle to do that. So operationally, having that human capability for this testing and development season actually works. It's much more productive. It's much more efficient. In the future, would I see a time when humans race against autonomous cars? Yeah, I would definitely see that. We're not there yet, but if you want to really showcase safety and performance, then that's one of the things that you can do. We can't do that with Roborace. That's not what we've set the championship up to do. We do, having said that, we do a regular competition against Lucas de Grassi, the Formula E champion. So maybe every 6 months for the last 3 years, we've done a lap time comparison. And with him, we started 20% slower. The software is 20% slower than him. The last dry weather test that we did, the software was 3.6% slower than Lucas. And if you took that in Formula One sense, it's within the 107% qualifying time. So it would have qualified for the event if Lucas had been P1. So that's already a milestone. And then the last challenge that we did against Lucas, I could say that the software beat him. Unfortunately, it was the weather conditions that meant that the software beat him. So he didn't have fair weather conditions. And then whenever we tried to do a comparison, the track conditions were the biggest variable. So again, I think to even be at that point where you're saying, yeah, it's the track conditions that are the biggest variable in performance, not the software or the driver, I think that's already a huge milestone as well. So it's not going to be long before the software can beat a human driver. It will happen first in dry weather conditions, for sure, where the track surface is a lot more predictable. Humans are very good at adjusting to wet tracks and taking small data points. So if you lock up into the corner, the next time round, you're going to brake a bit earlier. The software is not as good as taking those one-shot pieces of information and then adjusting its behavior at the moment. But that is changing.
I'm looking forward to the debrief when there's two different bits of software complaining it was track conditions were the reason they were beaten by each other, because that's clearly coming as well, isn't it, at some point?
No, I mean, we're already at a stage now where Lucas is saying, yeah, but if you do beat me, I weigh 80 kilos and you haven't got that in the car, so you need to put that back in. And then, oh, you've got access to torque vectoring that I don't have, so you need to take that off. And the moment you start doing the comparison, you start going into the fine levels of detail, as you say, to the level that a Formula One driver would with a teammate. So
we'll have to put Lucas in the car himself to say, here you go, you can be your own weight to try and slow it down. Okay, the next question comes in about actually when we're looking at some of the events you've done recently, it's asking about the obstacle avoidance. So what kind of approach are you using for obstacle avoidance? Is it reinforcement learning? So I think that's one for Ilya first.
Yeah. So for us, we noticed that approach for reinforcement learning is quite early to apply in such environments. It's good to apply in simulators, in some maybe not real task, but when we trying to apply reinforcement learning in the physical world with some real track, with real cars, we need to deal with unpredictables and noises that we have in real environment. And actually the research, the level of research in this area is not ready to be transferred and to be applied in those conditions. So for us, it's too early to apply reinforcement learning on the real track, but we see the huge potential in this technology, and we believe that in the long term, we definitely need to develop and need to look at this direction and need to keep an eye and keep research in those areas. And actually, we are discussing of opening some PhD position together with SIT in the area of reinforcement learning and how to control the car with reinforcement learning algorithms.
Yeah, we did some development work. So we've Roborace, we've collaborated with the VW group before. So VW have a AI specialist group, Data Lab Munich, and we gave them access to our platform for between 3 and 4 months. They had a team of about 9 people across 4 different companies within the VW group. And the fascinating thing for me, Chris, was that they did use some reinforcement learning to do sort of object detection, and then on the and affect the path planning. We did that at a proving ground. We had some static objects like a soft target car in the road. And what was amazing was that each time the car came around, depending on the line that it had just taken, it would either then go to the left or the right of the object. It wasn't pre-scripted, and the developers themselves had no idea what decision that it was going to take. And I think that to me was really fascinating, because then you start to build in, going back to that first question, some unpredictability. It's like the behavior is emergent, and it's emergent based on the conditions of the environment. So you're not exactly sure what's going to happen. So yeah, for me, it is fascinating, and it really gives you an insight into what the drivers are doing, like human drivers are doing, what they're thinking, and how skilled they are, basically.
Yeah, I think that is really fascinating, especially as you say, actually, because I think a lot of people instantly think of, well, with AI, it's going to just be follow the leader and they're all going to know what the exact quickest line is and they're all going to sit and follow each other to do that. So it's really cool to see how they then learn and adapt and change things. You mentioned that was a proving ground there, Bryn, but we've had a question in that says, how do you go about picking the circuits for the series?
Yeah, so any motorsport circuit is open and available to us. We do install infrastructure around the circuit, but we bring that temporarily. And that's, as Ilya said, that's for the safety aspect of the event. So we've been to a number of Formula E tracks before. We've done demonstrations in Rome, Paris, Berlin, Buenos Aires. We've then been to Las Vegas, where we do a lot of testing and development now. We have a permanent base at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. We've obviously been to Silverstone, to Anglesey. It's kind of like completely open. The benefit of a motorsport track is that they are set up ready for collisions and safety. The environment is incredibly safe. Proving grounds offer another opportunity. So we were in Hungary, where they have a 300-meter diameter skid pad. It's just a circular oval of tarmac, so it's completely flat, which is incredibly boring, but actually incredibly useful, because you can create whatever course you want on that environment and whatever challenge you want. And in actual fact, we did a coned course in that environment, which is the first time the AI did beat a human driver on the course. And the reason it beat the human driver was because we had a very tight chicane in that environment, and the AI could go lock to lock on the steering faster than the human. And so it was able to take that corner about 1.5 seconds quicker, purely because of that, which is amazing. So there are interesting limits of sort of, let's say, on the actuator performance of a human that obviously you don't have when you move to robotic control. So you don't see that so much on a track like Silverstone, Chris, for example, where it's much more flat and open, and it's much more about the dynamics of the vehicles.
Again, with my F1 hat on, there's going to be some teams coming to you now trying to work out how they can take that technology to Monaco and get around the circuit there quicker, because it's tight and twisty, and you can see drivers struggling with lock there. So,
well, the other thing that we've got, Chris, which is unique to us, is that we've got torque vectoring on the vehicle. So we've got 4 on the Robocar. We have 4 independent electric motors. That's one of the things that is often overlooked with electric power. You don't have to have one engine and try and distribute that. You can have 4 independent engines, and with that, you get a level of vehicle dynamics control that's never been available before. Even with the DevBot, we have rear-wheel drive, but 2 independent motors at the rear of the vehicle. So again, you can start to use torque vectoring to control the vehicle dynamics. And if you think back to Formula One, one of the technologies they banned on a McLaren was the fiddle brake. An extra additional brake the driver could use to brake the rear wheel in order to help turn the vehicle in a corner. And I think it was, I can't remember, spotted maybe in Austria. I think it was one of the events where the rear disc was glowing long after the vehicle was leaving the corner. But the reason I mention that is because torque vectoring is a vehicle dynamic control element. It was banned because it was a driver aid. But in actual fact, it was a driver skill. It was something else that you'd given the driver, an extra control element you'd given the driver, that if everyone had done it, it would have made the driving task harder, because how you then use that system is up to the driver. So I think it's going to be interesting as we move forward, when we start to talk about that parity in performance between machines and humans, what we give back to the human that we've taken away. So things like that fiddle brake control over the vehicle dynamics.
It's almost as if you've seen the questions that are coming up here, that these have all been sent in, because that leads in brilliantly to the next one, I think is for you, Ilya. But it's how can you distinct at the moment between an AI and a professional driver? And what's the hardest thing for the AI at the limits of handling at the moment?
So for us, it's the hardest thing is to adapt to the different environments. So right now we are testing and developing our software in pretty the same environments. I mean, it's a good track, good condition of weather, and we cannot adapt simultaneously. I mean, if in case during our race there is a rain starts, we cannot adapt quick enough as a professional driver. That's one of the things. So a human professional driver very quick in learning the dynamics and behavior of new cars. So we can took Lucas di Grassi place to another car, and he will, after several laps, he will understand and how to control what's the limits of this particular car. For our algorithms, at least for now, it's needed a bit more time to adapt to the new car, identify this car, understand the dynamics of this car, and then we just fine-tune our performance and understand the limits of this car. So that's the main distinction right now. So, but I would say that it's a matter of time, because we just started our season. We just started participation in Roborace, and I believe that at some point we'll achieve this level, and we understand how to learn this car behavior, the differences between different chassis, between one car and another car. We can learn it very quick in the future. So that's only a matter of time.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Chris, motorsport is often dominated by tires. I know Formula One is kind of dominated by tire performance. So managing your tires, that's still in some ways still an unsolved problem, working out exactly how tires will perform. They're an organic material, so they actually change quite regularly. That sort of managing of what they would call the GGV diagram, how much grip do you have longitudinally and laterally is what you need for vehicle dynamics. And I know that the teams, since they've started in Roborace, have improved their techniques at maximizing that GGV diagram significantly. So now the systems are able to go out there, start rather conservative, and then build up and start to expand the size of that GGV diagram. Now, what we noticed in the last Lucas versus a rival challenge was that ability to consistently improve lap time, then reach a limit, and then I saw the vehicle correct itself and stay on course. It actually slid the rear and slid it twice in order to recover, which was the first time I'd ever seen that level of car control. It was seriously impressive. It was a massive step on from what happened to Guy Martin. So that was impressive in itself. And then as the car came around the start finish track, I was like, but the real thing is, what's it going to do next time it goes into that corner? And next time it went into the corner, it then exceeded the limits even further and span out. So it's kind of like it's learning, but it really needs to learn from those mistakes and go, okay, but in this particular location, I need to then reduce that back down again. So rather than have a global model of the GGV diagram, actually have something that's very localized. And again, just imagine if you've got a drying track, that's your worst case condition, because now you have a huge difference between the availability of friction on the dry line compared to the wet line. Yeah. And that is something that there's no, self-driving vehicles aren't dealing with that level of detail at the moment. They don't need to. They exist. They drive well below those levels of friction. But for a Formula One driver, that's where you gain the performance. That's why Lewis can pull out 30 seconds in Turkey on top of everybody else in those wet conditions, because he knows where to go and find that grip and how to manage the tires, and that's what makes him a professional. So.
Now, I know we've been talking quite a lot here about motorsport and obviously the Roborace kind of sphere, but if we look wider and sort of bigger picture, a couple of the final questions we've got in. One saying, what do you think about the connectivity of cars to each other or some sort of management system. So can there be roads where both connected autonomous cars and human-driven cars are existing together? And at the moment, do you work with a complex system where multiple autonomous cars are involved together? So Bryn, if you want to start with that, because I guess the last part of that is a Roborace specific question.
Yeah, so yes, we have done competitions with multiple cars on track. And yes, we do actually use vehicle-to-vehicle communication and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. The ability for us to inject metaverse objects into the perception system, if you like, into the reasoning of the AI systems like Ilya's, is by using vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. We have the digital twin running in the background, injecting these virtual objects that then are projected down to the car, and the car has to avoid them in real life. So connectivity gives you basically perception around corners, perception beyond the limits of your sensors on your vehicles. So is it important? Yes, 100%. Lucas was involved, I often use it in my presentations. He was involved in the World GT race in Macau where 14 cars hit each other. One car went around a corner, a blind hairpin crashed. Everyone else came around the blind hairpin, not expecting there to be a stuck car there, and just ran into the back of the previous car that crashed into the back of the previous car. So would perception systems on the vehicle have helped? No, because you can't see around the corner and you're going into that corner at the limits of friction. You need to know in advance that there is an object you need to avoid, and you can only do that through communication technology. So for sure, it's going to be of value to human driving and automated driving.
And yeah, Ilya, if I open it up to you, I guess because you're having to deal with that, the connectivity side for you is with the metaverse.
Oh yeah. I just want to mention that even in the next event, which will happen on 20 and 21st of April, we already will have introduced the Ghost car, and our car and cars of other teams will be competing with the Ghost car, and those connectivity between our car and Ghost car will be done via V2X technology. So we will know where the other car located by V2X technology, and we will follow and overtake it, knowing position by V2X technology. And also Metaverse will draw and simulate the car and produce the visual effects for the camera, so audience will see it as well, because cars see only the position of the car based on V2X signal, and then Metaverse drawing and simulating the car behavior in the cameras.
That, I think, is where one of Ilya's partners, Acronis, really comes in, Chris, as well, because the moment you open up connectivity, you open up the threat of cyber security attacks. And so where in the metaverse we're injecting objects for fun in order to control and influence the behavior of autonomous race cars, you certainly don't want that to be possible for a kid sitting at the side of a road to inject an object into the road for an autonomous car to avoid that doesn't really exist. So the technologies are there. It's just now a question of how do you control all of those technologies. And so cybersecurity is another area that we're looking at within Roborace. Obviously, it's something that's really important to us.
Well, we've got time for two more questions that have come in, and one of them sort of leads on from that. I imagine it's an aspect you have to think of. So Bryn, if you want to take this one first, it's to what extent can the knowledge gained through Roborace be used to exploit the mobility of the future in a smart city?
Yeah, as Ilya was saying, the main point of motorsport is to develop technologies that are relevant to the road industry. That's why it's an R&D environment, an innovation environment. So the complexity of predicting future motion paths of objects is what we're now working on using the metaverse. And that's exactly what you need in a city to predict how cyclists will move, micro scooters will move, pedestrians will move. That's all about their prediction of their future motion paths and the risk that they present. So the technology is actually more transferable probably than some of the core vehicle mechanical technologies that we've been developing for the last 100 years in motorsport. So I think for me, there's more of a direct transfer of the software from one environment to another. An algorithm that works well in one environment can then move and work well in the other environment. That's the idea.
And Ilya, for you, I guess, do we see pretty quick progress on these sorts of things? Because obviously you're working in a competitive environment with Roborace, but as you said, your kind of targets change for each event as well, with like a ghost car coming in the next one. So how quick is the progress in this environment?
I think the progress is very tremendous. It's very fast moving progress in Roborace and also for each team, because we started with just racing line competition. Then Roborace introduced the virtual objects, static objects, and collectible objects. Then previous events we already had the dynamic obstacles which we need to overtake and dynamically. And next event it's already a goal car, and only how many, like four events passed, and we have this competition with a goal car. And I believe this transition from racing line to the wheel-to-wheel racing at the end of the season is very fast speed, and it's quite nervous for the team to be in this restricted environment with these time limits. But it's also a very good progress we are showing, and each team is showing. So, and answering to the question regarding the connectivity between Roborace and real world environment, so I believe there is each area of autonomous of self-driving car is covered in Roborace. And for us, particular goal as a team, we are focusing specifically in we call it like AI safety system, particularly how to control the car at very extreme condition, and how to control the car as not like average driver, but as a super professional racing driver. And we believe this technology can be only developed in Roborace environment and then transferred from Roborace to the public roads. So that's what our main target for now and for long term.
Thank you. Okay, and we've got time for one more. So the last question's quite an apt one, actually, after something Bryn mentioned, but it's autonomous cars use many sensors, such as image recognition, object detection, and some of the other things you guys have listed. And in order to develop and train these systems successfully, a lot of data must be collected, stored, and evaluated. So how is data protection, for example, with regards to facial recognition, taken into account? So Bryn, do you want to go with that one first?
Well, luckily in our environment, Chris, we don't have to worry too much about facial recognition, because we run without humans on the track at the moment. So that kind of, but I understand how that can be an issue if you're testing and developing in a real city environment. That becomes really important. So, but yeah, data collection is something that we leave to the team. So we provide the hardware platform, we provide the compute platform and all of the sensors. How the teams use that platform is up to them. So it's probably better for Ilya to describe what data he collects, how he collects it, how they train against that data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, I can explain it a bit. So right now for the current season, we're mostly working with data from car sensors, which show us how car behave in different conditions, like a steering wheel, acceleration, braking, and other like a specific sensors. But we don't deal right now with some perception data, because the main challenge for now is to achieve wheel-to-wheel racing. And actually, data is very important for us, because we base our decision based on the data. We cannot like blindly change the parameters of the car or make some decision of how we will approach this turn or next turn. We can do this blindly. We all analyzing data, and right now data is crucial factor, and how we analyze it and how we work with this, that's the main that's I believe one of the key differentiators between the teams. And I think so for us, we're spending a lot of time with analyzing the data, doing the local analyzation and understanding the car behavior, because it's hard to look at the real car. I mean, at usual motorsport, you have driver, and driver provides you feedback. How the car behaves on this turn or on that turn, when it slides, when it has a good speed. And in our case, we don't have the driver feedback. The only feedback that we have is the data that we collected and then analyzed, and based on this analysis, we do our decision. So that's the only way how we can improve our software based on the data.
Yeah, it's incredible how I was going to say, Chris, incredible how sensitive a human driver is to any sort of setup changes, and that's what's really challenging, is then saying, okay, when you take the human out, what additional sensors do you need on the vehicle to replace that information? And I do think that there will be the need for additional sensors, particularly around tires and tire performance, that we currently don't have. So.
Yeah, what's really exciting about this, from my perspective as well, is just how far there is to go, like how cool it is right now, but all of the potential and everything that can follow on. That's like the start of the journey still. So yeah, it's great to see. Now, I appreciate I've stolen an extra 5 minutes of your time, but thank you very much, guys, for the time and the answers. Just quickly for all attendees here, there'll be an email sent to you with the link to the whole event, so you can watch it back if you'd like to. Plus, if there are any unanswered questions, we'll still provide written answers to everyone. So you can send those to events@sit.org. But thank you so much to our speakers, Ilya and Bryn. Thank you also to all of you for attending and for the great questions. I've learned loads. I hope that you have too, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.
Super. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.